Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, Excellencies, heads of state and government, heads of delegations, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, at the outset, allow me to extend my warm congratulations as well as my best wishes for success in connection with your successful election to the presidency of the 76th regular session of the United Nations General Assembly. I can assure you of my delegation's full availability to support you in the fulfillment of your noble mission. Allow me to also pay a well-deserved tribute to Mr. Volkan Bozkir for the excellent manner in which he conducted the work of the 75th session, despite the constraints of the COVID-19 pandemic. I would also like to congratulate Mr. Antonio Guterres on his re-election as Secretary General of the United Nations and commend him on his leadership in managing the COVID-19 pandemic, and in particular his plea for equity and solidarity vis-a-vis developing countries, as well as his tireless efforts to strengthen the capacity of our organization to meet the aspirations of our peoples to security and prosperity within the framework of an enhanced multilateralism. Mr. President, this present session takes place in a context in which the international community grapples with the negative socioeconomic repercussions of the pandemic. Indeed, many gains laboriously obtained by developing countries have been severely jeopardized, particularly in the context of the implementation of the African Union's Agenda 2063 and the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda of the United Nations. In addition, due to the spread of new variants of the virus and the slowness in vaccine distribution in developing countries, the prospects for recovery and growth in the short and medium term may also be jeopardized if active efforts are not taken to strengthen measures to combat this serious pandemic. I remain convinced that mass vaccination is the only way to contain the pandemic and guarantee the recovery of the world economy. In this regard, I would like to welcome the COVAX mechanism, which has made it possible to collect doses of COVID-19 vaccines to distribute to developing countries. May all those who contributed to this effort be assured of our deep gratitude. In Niger, the measures taken by the government to address the pandemic have allowed to not only control the spread, but also to mitigate its socioeconomic impacts. Thus, despite the weakness of the economy and the persistence of other shocks, in particular security and climate shocks, the government has, through bold measures, been able to maintain a positive growth rate of 3% in 2020. Mr. President, allow me at this juncture to commend the efforts of the G20, the UN, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank in favor of a moratorium on the debt of the most fragile states, including many that are already at risk of debt distress. Obviously, a debt moratorium alone will not be enough, given the immensity of the challenges to be met, and hence the imperative need to design and implement a new paradigm to provide for the development needs of the most fragile countries, among other things. In the same vein, I remain convinced that the recovery of our economies will also depend on quality and dynamic partnerships, as well as on the liberalization of trade between developing countries. We must therefore take advantage of all the potential offered by South-South and triangular cooperation in the fields of technology, culture, and trade. It is to this end, and in order to meet the aspirations of the African peoples in according with Agenda 63, that the African Continental Free Trade Area was established, with my country leading the process up until the launch of the operational phase on July 7, 2019 in Niamey. Despite the delay in its entry into force due to the upheavals caused by the COVID-19 pandemic and other challenges, we are confident that the African Continental Free Trade Area will allow to establish a common market in Africa, sustain economic growth, and to create prosperity through the creation of jobs for young people in particular, more than 10 to 12 million of whom join the continent's labor market each year. Mr. President, in addition to having disastrous socioeconomic consequences, the COVID-19 pandemic has also magnified the challenges facing the countries of the Sahel, namely climate change and the security crisis. While in some regions of the world, this has resulted in floods, forest fires, or rising ocean levels, in others, such as in the Sahel region, it has resulted in extreme weather phenomena that include recurrent droughts, degradation of agricultural land. For example, Niger loses 100,000 hectares per year, and floods and locust infestations. As indicated by Mr. Mohamed Bazoum, His Excellency President of the Republic of Niger, during the meeting of the Committee of African Heads of States and Government on Climate Change held in Niamey, quote as follows: "If we are to win the fight against climate change, we will need more political will. We must, at the strategic and operational levels, promote the implementation of synergistic and coherent actions for a better resilience of our populations in the face of climate shocks and emerging challenges in the spirit of the Paris Agreement," end of quote. In this regard, the latest report of the IPCC, which has just been published, is a call for mobilization to action. By clearly affirming human action as an undeniable factor of climate change, the report calls on us to act immediately to meet the challenge of maintaining the level of global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius. The next conference of the parties to the Paris Agreement, COP26, scheduled for this November in Glasgow, should respond to this clarion call, in particular through the development of a common position that will enable us to overcome the challenges that still persist. These challenges include the financing of adaptation policies, as well as that of technology transfer in favor of developing countries. It is Niger's hope that this great COP26 gathering in Glasgow will serve as a platform to reaffirm political will to fight against the impact of climate change. For its part, Niger, in its quality as co-chair, together with Ireland, of the Security Council's informal expert group on this important issue, is working to ensure that the Council adopts a resolution to that effect in order to reflect the importance it attaches to this matter. Mr. President, it is our conviction that the fragility linked to climate change is an aggravating factor in conflicts and humanitarian crises. My country, Niger, which is surrounded by hotbeds of instability that severely impact its security, is all too well aware of this correlation. Indeed, since the events of 2011 in Libya, which facilitated the proliferation of weapons in the Sahel region, our countries have been dealing with attacks from droves of terrorists both in the Lake Chad Basin in the east and in the area known as the Three Borders in the west. Despite its modest resources and the extent of its territory, it has demonstrated resilience by safeguarding its territorial integrity and stability thanks to the foresight of its government and the courage and determination of its defense and security forces, as well as the invaluable support of our bilateral and multilateral partners, whom I would like to sincerely thank. It is, moreover, thanks to the recent successes achieved in fighting terrorist armed groups that we have been able to initiate the resettlement of In connection with this, I would like to inform you that last June, about 5,935 people originating from the locality of Barua in Difa and 19 other surrounding villages were able to return to their homes, which they had left in 2015. And this was done thanks to a pilot program which also aims in the long term to repatriate around 130,000 displaced persons from the Difa region to Borno State in Nigeria. This same program is also being carried out in the Tilaberi region in the west. As we fight for peace and security, we are not giving up the fight for the development of our country. We remain convinced that terrorism and organized crime are consequences of the multiple challenges that we will need to overcome, in particular those of poverty and inequality. Ultimately, it is not only military action that will allow us to definitively fight back terrorism, but also our ability to implement development programs that can meet the essential needs of our populations. The restoration of state administration and public services in the affected areas is an essential follow-up to military action. In this light, we will have to take due account of the gender and youth dimensions in the various processes of development and restoring peace. Indeed, in these areas, women and children are the first victims of terrorist groups which deliberately target civilian populations in schools, as is the case in the Central Sahel region, where villages are frequently attacked and thousands of children are deprived of education as a result. Thus, since 2017, nearly 5,000 schools have closed due to terrorist attacks, disrupting the education of more than 700,000 children and depriving more than 20,000 teachers of the opportunity to exercise their profession. It is therefore crucial that we honor our collective responsibility to build a peaceful and secure world in which all children can thrive. Faced with the gravity of this situation, Niger calls for concrete actions to protect schools. To this end, the Presidential Declaration on the Protection of Schools from Attacks, adopted in September 2020 when my country held the presidency of the Security Council, deserves increased attention from the international community. And I would also like to welcome all the initiatives undertaken by other member states on this important issue. Mr. President, while 2021 continues to be marked by the COVID-19 pandemic and security challenges, it has been a decisive turning point for the consolidation of democracy in my country. Thanks to the maturity of the people of Niger and their attachment to democracy, Niger was able to achieve the first peaceful political transfer of power in its history from one elected president to another democratically elected president. Thus, in his program, also known as Act 3 of the Renaissance Program, the new President of the Republic, His Excellency Mohamed Bazoum, has undertaken to consolidate all the achievements made during his predecessor's 2 terms and make the necessary adjustments based on lessons learned and the imperatives of the moment. One of the priority pillars of the President's program relates to the education sector. This is based on the conviction that the development of human capital remains the key to building a prosperous society that is committed to the values of peace, democracy, and the rule of law. That is also why the President of the Republic has made a commitment to all the people of Niger to personally ensure that the education sector is at the center of the government's actions during the next 5 years, with this technical and other support from all education partners, whether national or international. The government has already launched a project titled Improving Learning for Performance in the Education Sector, with the support of the World Bank at a cost estimated of $140 million. The implementation of this project will lay the groundwork for a qualitative transformation of our national education system while making it more adapted to our specific development needs. Mr. President, last year in the midst of the health crisis, we celebrated the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. It was a moment of reflection and also one of taking stock. While the United Nations has been able to spare the world of large-scale conflicts during the last 7 decades, it is clear that the central instrument of global governance that it represents must reform itself and adapt to the new realities and challenges of the 21st century. In this regard, one of the main lessons that we should draw from this current pandemic remains unquestionably the need to revisit the way we see the world, the way we work, and the way we organize ourselves. What we need now more than ever is a more inclusive multilateralism which is nourished by solidarity and sharing, and which takes into account the diversity that makes up the richness of humanity. Thus, the revitalization of the General Assembly, of ECOSOC, the Security Council, but also of international financial institutions such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank must be pursued tirelessly and to its completion in order to respond to the requirements of the contemporary world. Regarding the reform of the Security Council in particular, Niger reiterates once again its attachment to the common African position as expressed through the SIRT Declaration and the Azulwini Consensus. As a member of the Security Council since January 2020, my country has endeavored to make its contribution to building a calm and peaceful world. Be it African issues, of which there are many on the Council's agenda, including the situation in the Sahel, or the situations in the Middle East and in Palestine and Syria, Libya, Myanmar, or Afghanistan. In all of these cases, our priority has always been to take into account the urgent needs of civilian populations, in particular women and children, who are the first victims of conflicts and humanitarian disasters, which have unfortunately become a recurrent reality. Mr. President, in conclusion, it is my country's firm belief that the time has come for the international community to take into account the new challenges facing our world, challenges that threaten international peace and security. Just as we did in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, we must resolutely tackle these challenges of climate change, this other pandemic with devastating effects, the fight against terrorism and cybercrime, and many other problems specific to our century. In Niger, we have faith that our commitment to defending the ideals of our charter and the values of peace and solidarity that it embodies will allow us to successfully carry out this fight in order to build a world of peace, justice, and prosperity. Thank you for your attention.